What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 2 team in my 2021 preseason NFL Power Rankings, as we are going to take a deep dive into the Green Bay Packers. And this is going to be a particularly fun episode for a couple of reasons. Number one is you guys have made it abundantly clear that this is a controversial ranking, and many of you disagree with me putting the Packers ahead of the Chiefs. So still some explanation to come on that one after just doing my Chiefs deep dive a couple days ago. I encourage you all to go check that out after this video as well. But secondly, this is going to be an interesting one because I have been the most vocal and biggest critic of this team's front office, and a lot of the things that shook down this offseason for this team, and those that have followed what I've said about this front office, not just this year, but over the last few years, you might be a bit surprised to see the Packers come in here at number 2. So we will address that as well. We are going to start by taking a look at the Packers-Chiefs breakdown just slightly, just to explain that a little bit more. We'll get into the offseason per usual. We'll go through the roster, ranking each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, and then we'll take a look at this team's schedule, their Vegas over-under, and my win total expectations for this team. But before we do get started, a quick reminder to please do hit that like button down below if you enjoy. It really helps me out. And also, I want to take a minute to tell you about my friends at Magic Spoon. And if you are anything like me and you are looking for a healthy and convenient food to mix into your daily routine, well, Magic Spoon is perfect for me, and I really think you are going to like it. I reached out to them because I eat Magic Spoon every morning, and it has been big for me to have a convenient and tasty option that is now healthy, bringing you the same flavors of cereals of old that we used to eat as kids, but without the carbs now and high in protein. It fills you up and gets you to lunch, and it's convenient and tasty. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy Magic Spoon if you're looking for a healthier and convenient breakfast option. And now, using promo code FranchiseGuy, you can save $5 on your first purchase there at MagicSpoon.com. So that is promo code FranchiseGuy at MagicSpoon.com. I hope you enjoy and you will support the channel in the process. So go check that out. But let's go ahead and get started with the Green Bay Packers deep dive here. And as I mentioned, I do want to take a moment to just take a snapshot look at why the Packers are going to come in just ever so slightly ahead of the Chiefs, as it has been such a controversial power rankings reveal here. And as we take a look at the Packers team grade compared to the Chiefs, they actually both came out at 86.6. Now the Packers were 86.62, the Chiefs at 86.60. So if you wanted to tie these guys at second, I have no gripes with that. And I did have the Chiefs offensively as a tick above the Packers, but I do think these are the two best offenses in the NFL with weaponry, decent offensive line, of course the quarterback playing, great coaching staffs. But when you look at the defense, that's where I do see a pretty significant difference between these two teams. You might give the Chiefs nods in other aspects when it comes to Andy Reid over Matt LaFleur, or a little more dynamism on offense. But to me, that doesn't quite make up for the difference in defensive talent that the Packers have. So as we go here, I want you to notice some of the real upside that this Packers defense has, and a lot of reasons why. Honestly, if they ranked 10th defensively, that might be a disappointment considering how much talent this team has on that defensive side of the ball, which is just not something we could have said about the Kansas City Chiefs. So an extremely tight finish there between the Packers and the Chiefs, and I wanted to give one last little look at that before we move on from that point. And let's do that. Let's get into this team's offseason that I was extremely critical of here. I would say I've been as big of a critic as anyone towards this front office. And really, it's been about a lot of the things that Aaron Rodgers himself voiced as his reasons for his displeasure towards this organization, and that this team every year seems to get complacent. They don't participate in free agency. They don't trade for cheap veteran depth. They don't fill out the roster. They make poor decisions, honestly, when it comes to cap management and player retention. They let guys out of the building go that they really shouldn't, guys that Rodgers noted, guys like Micah Hyde, Casey Hayward, really throughout this tenure. And this offseason was really more of the same, especially in the spring, because we sit here now with a very talented Packers team and a team that, yes, has a very legitimate chance at winning a Super Bowl, just as they did last year after doing nothing to improve their team in the offseason. But yet again, we're sitting here wondering, did they make the right moves? Did they do enough to elevate this team to have the best team in the NFL? Not the third, not the fourth, not the second best team in the NFL, like they probably were last year at the end of it all, but the best team. And I think you can ask, yet again, if they left some meat on the bones this offseason. So let's take a look at what happened. So they make that big decision. Really, the first big thing they did was let Corey Linsley out of the building and choose to pay and retain Aaron Jones. And to me, this was one of the worst decisions of the offseason. You look at the Green Bay Packers as a team with an excellent passing game, a scheme that is conducive to the running back success, a team that had just spent a second-round pick on A.J. Dillon the year before, and the fact that, yes, Aaron Jones is awesome, but this is not Nick Chubb. This is not Derrick Henry, a Dalvin Cook level, elite of the elite running backs. He is a replaceable player on this Green Bay Packers team. They choose to let Linsley out the door, a first-team All-Pro center, and elect to pay a running back instead. That is just not something a smart team should or would do. You can also look at what seemed to be some obvious cuts in guys like Dean Lowry and Preston Smith, guys that are, not high-end contributors to this team, very much replacement-level players making a ton of money. Another sign of lack of aggressiveness and foresight to say we can cut these players, use that cap space in a better way. And then really the cherry on top of all this was them rushing to the table to pay Kevin King when there were better, cheaper free agent corners available. And not only that, but using $3 million of cap space into future seasons just to bring him back, when in reality, he is the worst starting cornerback in the entire NFL. And spoiler alert, as we head into this deep dive, the biggest question mark for this team is how quickly can Kevin King lose his job so that this defense doesn't have one of the biggest weak links in the entire NFL. So they rushed to the table to bring him back when there was better options available. They really are just trying to bring the band back together, and they made a few other moves as well. And then you can look at their draft as well, and this is where you can get pretty nitpicky, but a lot of people agreed that selecting Eric Stokes over an Asante Samuel, who is a perfect scheme fit and a day one impact, who is surely a better player than Kevin King, would have been a much better selection. Instead, they go with the speedy Eric Stokes, who is much more of a project player. And then they take, a player that many were unexpecting to go ahead of Creed Humphrey. They're going to have to prove that Josh Myers was the right pick ahead of a Creed Humphrey who we just really raved about, who's starting for the Chiefs. So you can really look at a lot of parts of this team's offseason that were extremely underwhelming. But at the same time, there is still some positive to take away here. So it's not, all terrible, but it just, I do think this team got better, but I don't think they maximized on value, and I don't think that they got as much better as they could have improved to this team. But all that said, as you look at their offseason, I do ultimately think this team did get better, and I actually think a big part of that is going to be Aaron Rodgers kind of coming in here and saying, yeah, go get us a starting slot receiver that can contribute now in Randall Cobb. Let's get a Dennis Kelly as a tackle that can plug in while David Bakhtiari is getting healthy here. And we have seen this team make 4 trades in the last 2 weeks, which is more trades than this team has made in 20 years. And I'm not making that number up. It is just insane that this team has ignored free agency and ignored trades just like that. Aaron Rodgers says, I'm sick of this. Let me voice my opinion. And they do some of this stuff to get him to come back. And I will applaud Aaron Rodgers for using his position to get this team to kind of pull their head out of their ass. So I think they did some stuff to amend really what was a disappointing offseason. And as you paint this picture now, this team did get better, but they didn't get all that much better. Granted, they were probably the second or at worst third best team in the NFL last season. So let's just paint this whole picture here. I do really like the move firing Mike Pettin really is what it comes down to. His defense had become too aggressive, and these defensive players just were not playing fast enough and didn't understand all these complex blitzes and coverages that they were running. Now going to Joe Barry, which is going to be running that much more conservative Vic Fangio style quarters, bend don't break style defense. Not that Joe Barry has been some amazing defensive coordinator, and there's some reasons to believe he might not be amazing, but Mike Pettin really was not getting the job done there. So I like the aggressiveness to move on from your defensive coordinator despite being in the NFC Championship last season. And then, of course, you move on from Corey Linsley and you draft Josh Myers in the second round. We can sit here and debate whether they should have taken Creed Humphrey, and I sure as hell think they should have, but Myers has hit the ground running, is going to be starting there, and it's going to be all on Josh Myers to give them starting caliber center play. Mention some of those veteran pickups, guys like Dennis Kelly, Randall Cobb, Devondre Campbell. Those are the types of depth and, in this case, starting additions for cheap veteran pickups that this team has avoided in the past that I think are nice, optimistic additions to this team. You get Josiah DeGuara, their third-round pick back last year. Definitely was an overdraft, but they really had plans for him in this scheme, and getting him back will allow LaFleur to reopen all of the different things they wanted to do with him as that tight end fullback hybrid type of player. And then Amari Rodgers, this team finally drafted a slot receiver. So a really sizable addition to this receiving core, getting Cobb and Amari Rodgers, which is a massive addition from what this team was working for in the slot last year. And then they draft Eric Stokes in the first round. Again, should have been Asante Samuel Jr., but he is a first-round corner with legit 4.2 speed, and someone that this team is hoping can really step in as a rookie eventually and make an impact for this defense. So this is an offseason that you can look at and say, all right, they pretty much are bringing the entire team back outside of the center situation. You're putting a lot of weight on a rookie there in Josh Myers. They made some slight improvements around that, and they're hoping to be a better team from last year, and I do think this is a better team from last year. Did they improve as much as the Chiefs did, as much as the Bucs did? Maybe, maybe not. I think that's all a very legitimate question to ask. But let's go ahead and dive into this roster, and you guys maybe can answer that question for yourself. We are going to start with the quarterback room. And no controversy here. Aaron Rodgers, defending MVP, they are going to rank second in the league. And yes, I will put Mahomes 1 for the purposes of this series. He's got the physical talent, the upside plays, all that stuff. I think that's the right thing to do. But it's crazy that I have to sit here and remind people that Aaron Rodgers was the best quarterback in the NFL last year, and there's almost no reason to think that he couldn't or shouldn't repeat as that. He really is playing quarterback at the absolute highest of levels you can imagine. You can even make a case that he is playing the best football of his career. You go back to 2015, 2016, part of the criticism of Rodgers was that he didn't play in structure enough. And now he has really found that perfect balance of having the right offense around him that does scheme guys open, which, you look at the later Mike McCarthy years, my goodness, there was not a lot of structure to be had. But now Rodgers playing as a surgeon, playing in structure, he makes less mistakes than any quarterback in the NFL, but he still brings somehow, on top of that, the perfect balance of play extension and aggressiveness, and was second in the NFL in, downfield attempts, 20-plus yard attempts in the league, and was remarkably accurate and still showed one of the best arms in the NFL at doing so. So yes, Patrick Mahomes is incredibly exciting, and yes, I will rank him number 1, but I really don't think that, people are entitled to their opinion, but in my opinion, the gap between Rodgers and Mahomes is minuscule, and Rodgers maybe rides a really high line at a more narrow margin, if that makes sense. Mahomes, his peaks might be a little bit higher, but you'll get some more of those valleys in there as well. So Rodgers does rank second in the NFL, but I just want to point out that gap between him and Mahomes, if you don't think it's marginal, I think you're wrong, personally. He is playing quarterback at the highest of levels. And then you have Jordan Love here, which is, a fun backup quarterback situation to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but those that have been around the channel know I'm very high on Jordan Love. He was my number 2 quarterback in last year's class. And now getting that time to kind of be groomed here, I still have very high expectations for Jordan Love. I've been really impressed by what he's done in the preseason. There's been some moments in there where he'll he's a guy that has some of those, Josh Allen, Jameis Winston tendencies where he'll push his limits and chuck it up into double coverage. You hope he can continue to weed those things out, and playing behind Aaron Rodgers is something that should help develop that, I think, as well. And Rodgers has taken on a total mentor role there. So I still am very optimistic for the future of Jordan Love. But even within this season, it does give the Packers an added layer of insurance. If any of these top teams lose their quarterback, we've basically said, yeah, their season's done, whether it's Mahomes or Russell Wilson or a lot of these guys. Well, in the Packers' case, I actually think they are a playoff team. I think they would at least win this division with a full season of Jordan Love. I think it's pretty far-fetched for this team to win a Super Bowl, but he is, one of the best backups in the league because he is poised to be the quarterback of the future here. And by all signs here, this is the last dance for Aaron Rodgers. And I think unless they do win a Super Bowl this year, I think it's very likely that Jordan Love takes over as the starter next year, though that's certainly not a guarantee. I saw the Packers have been keeping Rodgers in the loop in some of these team-building discussions, and that could still change. But this is the second-best quarterback room in the NFL, and I did want to take some time to point out that I don't think that gap is as big as I think some people expect between Mahomes and Rodgers, and I think that could be one reason why the Packers come in ahead of the Chiefs. Not because he's better necessarily, but because he's almost as good and has a little bit better of a surrounding situation around him. But let's go ahead and get into the running back room, which is another fun discussion to have. So they're going to rank 7th in the NFL. I think this is one of the more explosive, dynamic, deep groups of running backs in the NFL. And it's really 3 deep with Jones, Dillon, and Kylan Hill. And I promise you, I'm not going to keep droning on about this Packers-Chiefs debate, but I do think it's worth noting that the Packers running game adds a much larger dimension to offensive football than the Chiefs bring. The Chiefs have that one dimension of the passing game, and it is better than anybody has. But the Packers have an elite passing game and an elite running game. Part of that's the running backs here, and part of it's the scheme and the offensive line. But, with Aaron Jones here, it's like, on one hand, it's great that he's here. You are obviously happy to have Aaron Jones. They really like him. He's an awesome locker room guy. And what he does as a receiver really helps some things out as well. And now that they've filled out the receiving core, it hurts a little bit less. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I would not have paid Aaron Jones. You have an A.J. Dillon behind him who you just spent a second-round pick on, who looked good in limited looks as a rookie. You are pushed up against the salary cap. There are other areas on this team that could have been improved. And I don't think that that's a smart use of money, and I think a lot of people that follow the game closely would agree with that. So I'm sorry, Packers fans. I do think it was a mistake to bring him back, but if you want to talk about the running back room, he's going to help contribute to the 7th-ranked group here. He is explosive. He does generate big plays, even if not at the same clip, as I've mentioned, as guys like Cook and Chubb and Henry. He's not in that elite group of running backs that I do think brings a layer of elevation to the running game that is worth paying. I don't see Aaron Jones in that tier necessarily. I think he'd be worth paying for a team that maybe had a little more cap space, didn't have a great guy, a great option to step in like a Dillon and a Kylan Hill, and didn't have a legitimately great passing game. But here it just didn't make any sense to me. But he is here and contributes to one of the best running back groups in the league. Now, A.J. Dillon behind him, this is actually an upgrade to this team this year because they liked Jamal Williams so much from what he did as a pass protector and just the energy he brought as a leader. They almost felt, I think, forced to give Jamal Williams carries. But by the end of the season, and once it got to the playoffs, it was like, this is stupid. Why is A.J. Dillon not in there on 3rd and 1 based on what he's shown? And now Jamal Williams is gone, and we get to see quite possibly a running back duo that emerges as, I would just say, the 2nd best duo in the league, because it's going to be really tough to take that crown from Cleveland. But A.J. Dillon is a poor man's Derrick Henry, and he even has the upside comparable to a Derrick Henry, maybe not quite as fast, so I guess a tick below that. But he is extremely explosive at 245 pounds. He consistently breaks the first tackle. He actually has some ability to catch the ball and some shiftiness. So The added element of the running game here is extremely explosive. I do think the running game carries value in the NFL for all of this running backs don't matter talk, but specific running backs, maybe not so much. And then you have Kylan Hill. This is kind of the reason I felt pretty comfortable letting Aaron Jones go. You can find guys like Kylan Hill in every single draft. Now, credit to them for taking him and acknowledging the talent. This is a guy that I did think was a, early day 3 option, and someone that did have starting upside with speed and receiving ability and shiftiness and all of that shining through in, yes, just the preseason, but really did look the part of a guy that could emerge as a legitimate starting running back, and he's your third here. So super deep, explosive group. I think the running game here is not something to just dismiss. It was a huge part of why this offense was so consistent last year, because they can beat you through the air and they can beat you through the ground, and they can do both of those really at about a top 5 level, which is really scary. But let's move on to the receiving grade that ranks 15th for me. And I tweeted this, but this is, I think, for the first time since 2016, really since Brian Gutekunst took over here, the first time that the Packers can say they have a real NFL receiving core. They've had receivers. They've had Davante Adams, really is what it's come down to, and they've had an Aaron Jones out there do some stuff. But for the most part, behind Davante Adams, it's been MVS, Allen Lazard, Jake Kumerow. They were trying to force the ball to Geronimo Allison. You had 6'2", 6'3", stiff receivers who cannot shake in the short game. And honestly, guys with bad hands as well. It was just not a well-rounded diversity of skill sets that is so important in the NFL. You got to have different receivers that can win in different ways and in different positions, and they have not had that here. They've been forcing Allen Lazard to line up in the slot and win a quick route on 3rd and 4, doing the same with MVS. That is not what those guys do well, especially when you look at the NFC Championship. Those Bucs D-backs were clamping down on Allen Lazard, specifically, who was forced to try to be the guy that could win those opportunities, and he just couldn't get the job done. So now, for the first time in Brian Gutekunst's really Packers general managing career, he swallows his pride. He says, all right, Aaron, you say you need a slot receiver, we'll get you Randall Cobb. For some reason, Brian Gutekunst didn't think that was a good idea. Well, they needed that. Aaron Rodgers was right. Randall Cobb is nothing special at this point in his career, but you look at what he is as an upgrade to what they had at slot receiver last year, it is absurd. Now, part of that was Gutekunst probably felt like Amari Rodgers could step into that role right away, and sure, he probably could, but that's been an issue with the Packers, is they lean too much on these rookies to step in right away. Well, now you have Randall Cobb, who is proven. He's got that chemistry with Rodgers, and he can be an amazing mentor for an Amari Rodgers, who, heck, if Randall Cobb does get hurt, you've got a plug-and-play young slot receiver who's now learned the game better from a guy like Randall Cobb. So those two upgrades to me, on paper, don't look like amazing, right? But if you look at what this team has lacked in this receiving game and what they have not had there, that is an exponential upgrade to this offense and gives them a simple layer to this offense that they have not had. And that's a guy that can beat one-on-one coverage quickly and be a short yardage option. So those are the pieces I wanted to focus on first, because the rest of this is the same as last year. But of course, you have Davante Adams, who's in the conversation for the best receiver in football right now. I think very clearly the best route runner in football, and you add on great run after catch ability, also the best release in the NFL by a landslide right now. His release is on a Hall of Fame level right now. But the big step for Adams last year was the ball skills started to come on. The drops disappeared, and he started winning some of those contested catches. And that was the missing element to get him into that tier 1 group of receivers. So now he has more help here, because you also have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, I'm terrified to say this, but seems to be coming along and, dare I say, is a good piece for this offense. Now, I am extremely cautiously optimistic about that, because I don't remember a player that is as big of a roller coaster as MVS. It's like Nelson Aguilar on steroids here, where his separation ability is phenomenal. Rodgers finds him deep and just puts it right in his breadbasket. And MVS, he is, the thing I always say about him is it is a 50-50 ball for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, whether he's wide open and he's burned the D-back 5 yards behind him, or he's double covered and going up in traffic. It is always a 50-50 ball when you throw the ball to MVS. Now, the last 6 weeks of last season and into the playoffs, he didn't have any drops. He really looked the part as a good number 2 option. And at 6'4" with legit 4.3, 5 speed, he has developed his release and his route running to the point that he can actually be now in an offense that has slot options. You've got a Devontae Adams, a tight end that's emerged, and Aaron Jones underneath. You have solidified other pieces. Now MVS in a situation where he can just be that deep threat and not have to worry about being the number 2 receiver here or anything like that. You could actually get really nice contribution this year from MVS, much more than he has in years past. So I'm cautiously optimistic for him as well. I just find all this so fascinating because they've been so ignorant of this position group, and now they have real players at this position. But now Allen Lazard fills into the role I've been saying all along to Packers fans where he belongs as a wide receiver 4 or a wide receiver 5. He just doesn't separate. He has drop issues. He's a nice pair of hands, a big-bodied guy. He is, a good, solid 4th option to come in at wide receiver. So to have him as your 5th, all of a sudden, that looks pretty good, right? But the problem was when he was your number 2 guy, that just wasn't good enough. And then Malik Taylor makes this team. Don't have any expectations for him. You have Robert Tonyan, who is just a good, sure-handed guy, a converted college receiver who has some speed, some athleticism, decent option. It's not Travis Kelce here. Certainly not by any stretch of the imagination, but he is a reliable option in the receiving game, and he's an addition to this receiving group, not a detractor, I would say. Interested to see what Josiah DeGuara can do here. As much as I hated that pick, he has a role in this offense and showed some nice things in the first game and a half of the year before he got hurt. I didn't think I would say I'm excited to see what DeGuara can do here, but now that he doesn't have to be a starting tight end, it's like, okay, I can see where he kind of fits into this offense a little bit better. Sternberger is currently suspended. A big year for him to kind of show that physical upside as a former 3rd-round pick, but maybe something in the tank there for him still. And then Mercedes Lewis, just not an addition to the receiving core, but does contribute to a really good running game here and is a good pass protector as well. Then you can take a look at Aaron Jones in the receiving game. Another situation where, last year for the majority of the season, it was Aaron Jones had to be paired with Allen Lazard as the only other option next to Devontae Adams. But you get MVS solidified a little bit. Tonyan comes along. Randall Cobb, Amari Rodgers get brought in here. And now what Aaron Jones offers as a receiver looks a lot better because he's got the experience of having to be this team's number 2 target, but he's not going to have to fill those expectations, and some of those looks will open up. He is a great route runner. He flies around the second he catches the ball, extremely fluid in space. I do really like what he brings to the table as a receiver, and the fact that he does those things, I would just say sweetens the fact that they did pay him so much money at least a little bit. A.J. Dillon can catch the ball, but not much of a route runner. And then Kylan Hill, if anything happened to Aaron Jones, I think would actually be comfortable stepping in as a rookie. He looked really fluid doing that in college coming out and showed some stuff in the preseason as well. So finally, the Packers can say they have a real NFL receiving core here. There's still some work to do, absolutely, and it's not an elite group by any stretch of the imagination, but this is the best receiving core Rodgers has had in a long, long time, and it's really not all that close. I think you got to go back to about 2015 since the last time Rodgers had a real balanced group with some explosiveness in certain areas as well. So definitely a positive outlook on this receiving core compared to last year where they ranked like 26th, 27th, I think. And now the offensive line, this is another interesting conversation because it was just announced that David Bakhtiari is going to be out for 6 weeks. And then, of course, they move on from first-team All-Pro Corey Linsley to draft Josh Myers. So there's going to be some questions, especially in the first 6 weeks of the season. And that's tough to balance. They're not going to be the 11th best offensive line, which is what I rank them here. They're not going to be that week 1 against the Saints. It's going to take them some time to get there. But I do think this can still be a top 10 offensive line by the time the playoffs hit. So you start with your tackle duo, and to start, it's actually going to be probably Billy Turner at right tackle, and actually Elton Jenkins is rumored to step out at left tackle. Now, they have some different options there. Runyon's played some tackle and looked okay, and Dennis Kelly was actually a really nice pickup, an underrated player that started every game for the Titans last year after Lewan went down, and he can totally play. I think that was a sneaky good pickup for this team to provide some insurance and a guy that can actually provide starting caliber play. And he might even be a better tackle than Billy Turner. But Elton Jenkins playing left tackle for the first 6 weeks of the season, it could be actually a blessing in disguise for the Packers long term. I'm extremely intrigued to see how he looks there. Not that he's going to take David Bakhtiari's job, but what if Elton Jenkins looks phenomenal and he does good against guys like Nick Bosa that he's going to see on this schedule? What if he looks good at left tackle? Well, it doesn't take too much to then say, why would we keep Elton Jenkins at guard? Let's put him at right tackle, a much more valuable position that is a position that has hurt us a little bit. So there's actually, yes, early on there's some downside there, but I actually think that's almost likely that happens. I think Elton Jenkins is a hell of a football player. He's 6'5", he's super quick, he's got the length to play tackle, and he's a former center as well. This dude has everything. He is an ascending star, and you just ask around the league, people rave about Elton Jenkins. So if he looks good at left tackle in an opportunity that he normally wouldn't have gotten because of the David Bakhtiari pup list that he just got put on, well, I think that it's actually pretty likely that he kicks out to right tackle, and then all of a sudden that could be, dare I say, the best tackle duo in the NFL, because David Bakhtiari is, if not the best, he is the second best tackle in the NFL. It just comes down to preference on if you want the run blocker in Trent Williams or the pass blocker in David Bakhtiari. But you will get Bakhtiari back. I think they're just being careful there. He's had plenty of time to recover, so you get him back, you get that rock at left tackle. And then whether Jenkins is playing left guard or right tackle, he's another rock star, all-star, ascending all-pro caliber player. I think the way people talk about Elton Jenkins, I don't think that's unfair to say. Now, this is almost similar to the Chiefs, where it's like, okay, center to right tackle is a lot more questions. We've at least seen Lucas Patrick play. He's an underrated player. He's been solid. He started every game for this team last year, and he's not a mauler. He's undersized. He's not a great athlete, but he's got good technique. He's a smart player, and he is far from a liability out there. You have, again, Billy Turner, who can play right guard. He's a good player, can play right tackle, just not a great guy. Both Turner and Kelly offer low-end starting right tackle play. I don't think those are liabilities, but certainly not true strengths either. And then you have Josh Myers at center, which has got to be the biggest pivotal position for this entire team. Because you move on. That's really the only player you're replacing is Corey Linsley there at center for Josh Myers. Now, Myers to me was a third-round prospect. He's got decent athleticism, decent play strength. Now, one of the big things that caught my attention about Myers was his blitz recognition sucked, but he is going to have the benefit of a former center in Elton Jenkins next to him, which, by the way, if Myers really sucks, Jenkins could also go the other way and become this team's center. So they have some flexibility there. But they are going to really hope Myers can be that guy. But you have former centers next to him, Elton Jenkins, Lucas Patrick. The communication part of that will be solid. And you also have Aaron Rodgers calling out protection, something he does not mind doing. So for this team, that part of Josh Myers, which was a weakness for him, he's not going to have to worry so much about that. And I think you can't really draw up a scenario that is more conducive to developing a second-round center. I do think it was a reach. I would have taken Creed Humphrey, but the fact that he has won that job, there's been no bad mouthing coming out of him coming out. in preseason, it seems likely that he's at least going to be a starting caliber center. Of course, that there could be, this could be a worst case scenario. He could just get steamrolled and be the worst center in the NFL. I really don't think that's going to happen. As low as I was on this pick, it's still a great situation. This is a team that has just pumped out centers. J.C. Tretter, Corey Linsley, and now they're hoping Josh Myers can just be next in line there. So that's how I feel about Josh Myers. Like I said, at that draft pick, when it happened, I think he's going to be a really good pro. He does not have the upside and frankly is not as good as day one as Creed Humphrey. So that's where I'm at with that. I'm not all that worried about this offensive line. We also didn't mention Royce Newman, who has been just getting rave reviews from preseason. I don't want to overreact to that. I don't want to look into that too much. I didn't see too much in him coming out, but he's going from tackle to guard. Could just be a nice transition there. So just another guy to keep an eye on there. You're really about 8 deep. You have a ton of flexibility. Elton can play center. Lucas Patrick can play center. Turner can play guard. They will figure out a unit that is a good offensive line here. I'm really not worried about it. So they rank 11th. I think there's some points that you can say that's a slight weak point. You're hoping Josh Myers really kicks on, but for the most part, they rank 11th. I think this will still be a very good offensive line. It was a top 10 unit last year, and from a talent perspective, other than Corey Linsley, which is a big piece, of course, they still had some of these weaknesses. You had Patrick and Billy Turner out there constantly last year, and they still were one of the best offensive lines in football last year. So from a scheme and culture development point, this team, I do believe, figures this out to be a very good offensive line, even if it's got some weak points. So that's another spot that I think I'm probably a little bit higher on. I think people are freaking out a little bit about Josh Myers being in there, David Bakhtiari being out for 6 weeks. I really don't think that's going to hold this team back all that much, considering the injuries they dealt with last year. They still went to the NFC Championship with Bakhtiari out last year, and they moved these guys around a ton. That's why they like guys like Patrick and Turner and a John Runyon with this flexibility, even a Royce Newman, who played tackle in college, and of course, Elton Jenkins there. So we already mentioned this is the second-ranked offense in the league. And then I also got to give a little bit of credit here to Matt LaFleur, where they're going to rank 5th for offensive coaching. I almost feel like LaFleur doesn't get quite as much respect as he deserves. It's kind of like, yeah, he took over a team with Aaron Rodgers. They have some really good talent. But look, they're 26-6 in the regular season in the 2 years with Matt LaFleur, and they've been to the NFC Championship twice since he took over. He's on pace to be the most winning coach of all time. And of course, he's had a lot of stuff around him to help accomplish that. But that, I almost feel like, doesn't get brought up enough. And on top of that, it's the play calling here has been spectacular. He has such a comfortable feel for pre-snap motion, when to go play action. He's also a very good late down play designer as well. I think he's constructed a very well-balanced offense and not gotten too one-dimensional, which has been a problem for teams like Tennessee and Minnesota. So who run this Shanahan wide zone play action offense. So I think Matt LaFleur is almost underrated in a lot of ways and is well deserving of the 5th ranked offensive coaching ranking. And you also get the impact of Aaron Rodgers, who calls plays and coaches this offense in a lot of ways as well. So 5th for offensive coaching, as I just mentioned, it is that Shanahan offense. You're going to get those wide zones, the play actions, the crossing routes, all that stuff that we've detailed with teams like the Seahawks and the Niners, of course, and the Rams. So that is the offensive deep dive. And now let's get into this defense that I previewed is a lot better than I think people realize. And I already kind of spilled the beans on it, but I do see the Packers as a top 10 defense this year. As you will see here, there is a ton of talent on this roster that, strangely enough, I think a lot of times actually goes unnoticed by a lot of people. And I do think that this defense is the biggest difference between a team like the Chiefs and the Packers. And ranking 10th, it almost feels like a worst-case projection. And as long as Joe Barry can implement this Fangio scheme that's working around the league, which does actually fit these players really well, that I will highlight, there's no reason this can't be a top 5 defense in the NFL and be really scary. So I'm excited to break this unit down because I do feel like it is underrated in a lot of ways, but they do have some weaknesses as well that we'll talk about. But let's start with the run defense. So under Mike Pettin, this team really didn't give a damn if they stopped the run. They were in nickel and dime packages more than anybody else, and that shouldn't change a ton, honestly, from a philosophical point of view. This modern thinking Joe Barry, call it Brandon Staley 3-4 defense, they are sort of that bend, don't break, and almost inviting you to run style front. So it is what it is. This team clearly is not investing a ton in the run defense aspect of this defense, which is smart modern football. They are much more worried about the pass rush and the coverage here. But we will still talk about the run defense. They do rank 21st, so they have some pieces to stop the run. I don't think they get gushed. But it's also not like they're going to shut down the run, or teams that are really good at running the ball are going to back down from attacking this front. So that's basically where I would leave it, is 21st. You do have Kenny Clark up front, who's a tone setter, and was really put in a lot of tough positions in Mike Pettin's defense, because especially in that scheme, he was oftentimes the only actual defensive tackle out there. I do think we'll see a lot more help now from Dean Lowry and Kiki and Lancaster, and a Tadaro Slayton, who's actually looked pretty good in the preseason, was a mid-round pick that I liked. He was a just massive nose tackle that does actually have some athleticism, and a great mentor in Kenny Clark ahead of him. So you actually have, 5 deep guys that'll rotate in and out, I think. I think Slayton does play, and Kenny Clark is one of the better run-stopping nose tackles. So to be able to craft everything around him, as average as the rest of this group is, it's a very nice asset to have, and probably the biggest reason they rank 21st. You look at the edge, really between Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, and Rashawn Gary, these guys have the size to be dominant run defenders. This is the largest edge group in the league, and they're a 3-4 front, which is pretty surprising. But Preston Smith, maybe the most consistent, disciplined of the three. They kept him around assuredly because he is a really nice early down edge player that can still get after the quarterback for sure. We'll talk about how Gary will get into the mix there. Zadarius Smith, I do expect to continue to be the full-on 3-down starter there. A guy with incredible length and quickness, and he makes splash plays in the run. But because of his play style, he's a very unique guy that relies on some of that quickness in his game. He's not always the most powerful player, especially against the run. He can play a little upright. He is 6'5", and guys can get up and under him, but he will also have good contain to the sidelines, where he's also, he's not the fastest player either. So like his closing speed, his pursuit speed, isn't amazing. But both those guys very serviceable. Rashawn Gary is the guy that actually has an incredible amount of upside against the run. The thing is, he just hasn't had a lot of opportunities to play that role for this team. I do think that changes this year, and he becomes their best run defending edge player as the season goes on, because he was dominant against the run at Michigan, and getting into that role a little bit more, I think would be good for him. That's part of why I thought it was silly that they kept on to Preston Smith at like $12 million this year. That could have been used elsewhere, like a number 2 corner, for example, because Rashawn Gary's probably a better player all around than Preston Smith. And then your linebackers, it's one of the worst linebacking groups in the NFL. They're similar to a team like the Rams that we've talked about, where they're very comfortable not investing in linebacker. They're going to hope that these guys are secure tacklers. I think that's what they like about Devondre Campbell. They're going to really rely on the scheme to put these guys in positions, and as long as they are secure tacklers, they're going to hope that they're not really being asked to do too much in coverage, and they hope that the way that they scheme up the gaps up front in the 3-4 defense, that they'll also have clear lanes behind guys like a Kenny Clark to really get in there and take advantage of that tackling. So that's why they like Barnes, especially why they like Campbell. I will get a little bit more into the linebackers there, but they're not really contributors in run defense. They're just kind of there. And then you have Oren Burks, uber athletic guy that has not really reached his potential at all. Ty Summers, 7th round pick, has been a special teamer. I do like Isaiah McDuffie as well quite a bit. Was one of my sleepers in this draft coming in, and we'll continue to talk about those linebackers, but they really don't contribute to the run defense. And that's really all I'm going to mention there. They rank 21st. It's all kind of built around Kenny Clark, and for the most part, they hope they don't get gashed. If they end up going against a team like Tennessee or Baltimore or maybe San Francisco, those are teams that could give this team fits if they're elite running teams. But for the most part, I don't think this is going to plague this defense. I don't think they're the worst run defense in the NFL. But then you get to the pass rush, and this is the first big reason I like this defense so much. They're going to rank 6th in the league, and it doesn't take much for them to be even better than that. I think this is actually a pretty underrated group, actually. There's a ton of talent here. If you go back to just 2019, when there were crowd noises, this was the second best pass rush in the NFL, right behind the 49ers. Now, I don't know if they're going to be Washington, Pittsburgh good, but if you just take what they were last year, which was about 13th, you put in a healthy Kenny Clark and crowd noise, and I think they can get back into that top 3 conversation. I really think this is that big of a high upside and honestly slept on group a lot of the times. But you start with Za'Darius Smith, who, if you just look at a per pass rush snap basis, is actually the most efficient pass rushing player in the NFL, not named Aaron Donald, going back to his last year in Baltimore, 2018. Now, he doesn't get the double teams that guys like Watt and Mack and Myles Garrett demand, so I don't think he's as good as those guys, but I do think that is certainly notable, and his production, his sack numbers, his contract, the value he's put on this team. He is an underrated player in the NFL. I don't think that is a controversial statement. He was a huge contributor to this top pass rush, and he's going to be able to do a lot of just different things here. Part of what makes him so special is he'll actually come inside a lot of the times, which allows them to keep Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith on the field at the same time. And Kenny Clark's size and power on the inside also compensates for the fact that you're putting an edge player inside in those true pass rushing packages. And I do expect them to still do those things under Joe Barry. But just his versatility and his efficiency is incredible and honestly not discussed enough. But then you have on the other side a player that I think is poised for a massive season in Rashawn Gary. And I do think this is the year that we really see him flush out Preston Smith here. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL strictly because I remember pounding the table for him so much coming out. People were knocking his efficiency even though he put up a ton of pressures and a half-decent amount of sacks in college despite playing injured, despite being constantly doubled. I really thought he was one of the most unfairly scrutinized players in the entire pre-draft process coming in. Now, you could debate if the Packers should have drafted him because they had just paid Za'Darius and Preston Smith. I was pounding the table for DK Metcalf at the time, but this has been the long-term plan, is for Rashawn Gary to be phased in, and he's a guy that has alpha number 1 pass rush potential, but he doesn't even have to become that guy for this to be an elite pass rush because you have Za'Darius and you got Kenny Clark next to him. But he has some of the best combination in the NFL of get-off, length, size, strength, and that equates to power. His long arm bull rush is up there with the best of them. He's not quite Myles Garrett and Khalil Mack, but I don't know how many other players in the NFL rival his ability as a power rusher that he really burst onto the scene last year in the second half of the season. So he's a piece that 2019 pass rush actually didn't have, right? It was mostly the Smith brothers and Kenny Clark that made them the second best pass rush in the NFL. So Rashawn Gary, I do think, is poised for a really explosive breakout season this year, and is yet another player that is underrated and not discussed enough for what he's going to bring to the table this season. And I think a lot of that goes back to what people were saying about him in the pre-draft that just hasn't equated to his on-field performance, especially in the second half of last season when he was really getting that full-time opportunity for this defense. Now, if you're sticking with the edge group, Preston Smith is going to be a part of this, whether it's taking snaps from Rashawn Gary on maybe earlier downs or them using some of those flexible packages, as I mentioned. So you will see Za'Darius and Rashawn Gary, who both have size and flexibility to slide further inside, and then Preston Smith comes out. And, as a fourth piece, that's more than good. Teams would enjoy having Preston Smith as their number 1 pass rusher, frankly. And a lot of teams, he'd be their number 2. So while I would have cut him, I would have used that $10+ million towards a number 2 corner. I don't think they need him. he is a luxury that this team has out there. So it's one of the best edge groups in the entire NFL. Garvin and Rivers, I'm not expecting much there. But then you slide inside. You have Kenny Clark, who missed about half of last season. You got to keep that in mind as well. And he just wasn't healthy all season long. So getting him back to 2019 form is certainly not a stretch. He's since been paid as one of the top defensive tackles in football. And when he's healthy, he's one of the premium pass rushing interior guys in the league. He's up there with where Fletcher Cox is these days. Frankly, he's not that far behind a Chris Jones. He's up there with the two guys in Pittsburgh, so he really is a special guy. Got to mention Grady Jarrett as well. So he's in that cluster as a pass rusher and a premium nose tackle that also opens up some of this other stuff because he is that physical presence that demands a double on the inside and opens everything else up. So in a base nickel situation, Dean Lowry got the majority of those snaps last year. We'll see if this team kind of wakes up and puts Kingsley Keke in there, or if Kingsley Keke continues his development to take that, because I do think Keke is just straight up a better three technique than Dean Lowry. He's got more power and quickness and pass rush ability. So we'll see how that shakes down. But with everything else around there, and how they're going to rotate in Preston Smith, this is a diminished role for this defense. You might see some 3-3-5 looks, where all five of those guys are on the field, being the two edge guys, Kenny Clark and Preston Smith, and a Keke or Dean Lowry. But for the most part, that position is not a strength here, but they do some nice stuff, as we've mentioned, that's not as big of a deal. You got Tadarill Slayton, who I have talked about being a nice prospect with some size and power. I think if Kenny Clark got injured, you have more of that true nose tackle this year to at least play that role. You're not going to get him splitting double teams and getting pressures and sacks out of that, but schematically you can at least ask that of him and continue to open things up for everyone else. Because without Kenny Clark out there, you saw how bad, not how bad, but you saw a significant drop-off in the pass rush. Heflin and Lancaster are more run defender projections there. So they rank 6th for pass rush, and I really don't think that's a stretch at all. And I don't think it's much of a stretch to say this can be a top 3 elite game-changing pass rush, just as they were pretty close to being in 2019. And the last thing I'll say there is I do think it's very much worth noting that crowd noise is going to return, and many people might think that sounds silly, but for those that have been to an NFL game, especially at a stadium like Lambeau, that is a huge impact on the pass rush. I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw them go from the second best pass rush to the 13th last year without crowd noise, especially in the case of like a Preston Smith, who is very reliant on timing the snap. Well, when you get the crowd noise going, not only does it motivate your defensive players, but most importantly, it forces your opposition to go to silent counts, which means that the center, or the guard actually, has to tap the center when the quarterback is ready for the snap, and then the edge can fly off the ball. So some of the more technically sound rushers, guys like Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, they feed off of that, and they certainly did in 2019. So that is certainly a notable boost to this defense, being a more pass rush oriented defense. But let's move on to the linebacking group here. You know, Green Bay is not putting a priority on these linebackers, and I'm not going to put a lot of time into this group either. They bring in Joe Brady, coming from the Rams, and that was almost a match made in heaven. You know, Green Bay's been ignoring the linebacker position for 10 years, and they hire a defensive coordinator that coached the scheme that put the least amount of pressure on their linebackers in the NFL. So that is a very nice pairing. This defense does a very good job of helping these linebackers in coverage with the split safety defense. These safeties will work a lot in that middle of the field that doesn't ask these linebackers to really get a ton of depth. They're just hoping that they can scheme guys open in the run game to take advantage of secure tackling. I think that's why they like specifically Devondre Campbell so much, because if he does anything well, it is use the 6'4" wingspan and quickness that he has to be an amazing tackler that he really has been. It's the other part of the game with Devondre Campbell that hasn't been there as far as route recognition and coverage and really thumping at a high level. You have Chris Barnes, who was a very nice undrafted pickup, showed some nice things, but he was an undrafted rookie linebacker. Had a nice season preseason as a young player. He's got athleticism, he's got balanced size, he's a decent tackler, and showed some flashes in coverage. I think there's some upside in there, but to count on much from him, you're just not. This team's not counting much on these linebackers in general. But at the end of the day, they are just hoping these guys can be decent athletes, which both Barnes and Campbell are, be decent tacklers, which both Barnes and Campbell are, and neutralize their weaknesses via scheme. So that's really what this comes down to. They do rank 31st. You got Oren Burks, who has not developed here, but a super high-end athlete. He kind of earned a roster spot by playing well in the preseason. Still not expecting much from him, but did have a good camp, and they ended up cutting Kamal Martin, who was a fourth-round pick and showed some good stuff as a rookie to kind of keep Oren Burks there. A bit of a surprise. So keep an eye on that. You got Ty Summers, who really is just a special teamer. He's got speed and is a former quarterback, so you hope that he can develop, but expecting that is pretty unlikely. I do need to spend a little time on Isaiah McDuffie because he was one of my sleeper picks and my guys in this draft. I had him as a late day 2, early day 3 prospect. They end up getting him in the 6th round. He's a guy that declared early out of Boston College, but as I was sorting through those linebackers, kind of 20 through 40, he absolutely popped for me. And he actually ended up as my 9th linebacker in this class. He absolutely popped with his kind of see-ball, hit-ball ability, the tackling, something they probably really liked from him. If nothing else, he is going to be a spark plug for this defense. He will light you up. But it's not just that. Like, he showed some stack shed ability. He had some flashes in coverage, but a very just raw young player. Reminds me a lot of James Pierre-Louis, also with, 4.55, 4.6 speed coming out of Boston College as a young player. So do keep an eye on Isaiah McDuffie. I thought that was an excellent pick, and to see him make this team ahead of a guy like Kamal Martin, also some optimism there. He also had a good preseason. So I don't see him starting, but potentially a high upside day 3 pick there that I did like. So 31st at linebacker. It's not a priority for this defense. They're not going to help this defense. They are just optimistic that this unit will not hurt this defense, and I kind of agree. It's similar to some of these other more modernly built defenses that we've talked about. We've seen a lot of teams invest heavily in linebacker and not get high-end linebacker play. It's a really freaking difficult position to play in the NFL in 2021, and I think there's a very good case to be made that investing in linebacker isn't always the best way to do it. The Rams completely ignored the position and made the best defensive football last year. And now you have that scheme here in Green Bay. So I'm not really worried about the linebacking group, especially considering this is one of the better ones they've had in the last 5 to 6 years. But then we get to the secondary, and they rank 8th in the NFL for me. Now, this is a polarizing group, and I think they're a little underrated, but I think the reason people don't like this secondary is because of Kevin King's existence. And honestly, fair. To me, it is appalling that, let alone that he's on this team. I can't believe he's still on the Green Bay Packers, but the fact that they rushed to the table to bring him back in free agency, overpaid him, pushed money into the future, and passed on other veteran corners that are at least capable number 2 veteran starters, because I think Kevin King is almost quite clearly the worst starting cornerback in the NFL, the worst active current CB2 in the NFL. Now that Trey Flowers is no longer starting in Seattle, I honestly don't know who's in the running for that label. So it's remarkable that he's here, and he is a complete eyesore. If you think that they can't have a good defense as long as he is on the field, honestly, I get it. I really do. But I also, for the life of me, cannot imagine that he won't get yanked out of there. Now, there's only one guy here that can fill into that, and this is the one part of this team that has got to happen. Kevin King has got to lose this starting job to Eric Stokes, and I thought it was going to happen when King was hurt in the preseason, and of course, Kevin King couldn't stay healthy for the first 3 years of his career, and now that for some reason Green Bay bought into him, they can't get him off the field for injury, but you need Eric Stokes to take that CB2 job. So we're spending a lot of time on CB2 here because he's Jair. He's the second best corner in the NFL. He's unbelievable in man. He's a super heady, smart player. I can't wait to see what he does in this cover 4 defense. that's part of the excitement there, is you have Jair Alexander there. But I think this CB2 spot is super fascinating. So you look at Eric Stokes, who I did think was a second-round prospect, and that's why it's so frustrating they passed on Asante Samuel Jr., because he played in a cover 4 system. He's super smart, super quick, would have just made this almost the best defense in the NFL, potentially, if they got Asante Samuel. But now you're counting on Eric Stokes, who's kind of a man-to-man guy. Didn't show a ton of great zone instincts. He's not the quickest player. He's very fast in a straight line. It's hard to imagine that he'd be worse than Kevin King, and they spent a first-round pick on him, which gives you optimism that they will pull the trigger eventually when Kevin King is struggling. So that gives you some optimism that it's not going to be Kevin King, but it really does come down to Eric Stokes. Now, I like that they went and got Isaac Yiadom. I think he's about as good as King and gives you some depth, but he's not an answer to Kevin King. He really isn't. He wasn't much better for the Giants last year than Kevin King was bad for the Packers. So I like the move, getting depth. He's a guy with starting experience, and maybe something turns around for him. He's a lot younger than a guy like King. But that's really what this comes down to, is CB2 figuring out just get a Michael Davis caliber player, a Levi Wallace caliber player in there, and this will be not just a top 10 secondary, a top 5 secondary, because that weakness is so glaring. You know, Chandon Sullivan in the slot is fine. He's a low-end starting slot corner, but far from a problem for your slot corner. I like that he'll be in a lot more zone coverage opportunities in this system. And the safety duo is one of the best in the league. There's no way around it. Adrian Amos is one of the smartest, balanced, do-it-all safeties in the traditional sense of the word. And then Darnell Savage in this scheme, I compared this to Eddie Jackson and Adrian Amos in Chicago when they drafted Savage, because Savage, just like Jackson, has elite kind of juice and ability to break on balls, and Savage even has way more athletic ability. The way he accelerates in his top speed, it's truly unique. He has an Earl Thomas caliber ceiling as a free safety. And now in this cover 4 heavy system, I really have heavy expectations for Darnell Savage. And he's another player on this defense that I say, if he goes from high-end starter, which he's been since the day they drafted him, to dominant sort of Jesse Bates caliber free safety, which I don't think is a stretch at all. I think there's a 50-50 chance he gets there and has a huge season. This secondary is going to look remarkable. It's just get Kevin King off the freaking football field, Green Bay. What are we doing here? You got Vernon Scott, Henry Black, low-level depth. You're worried about injuries for sure. It's not the deepest secondary, especially in the safety room. But the top-end talent here between Jair, Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, it could be fireworks here for this defense. And I don't think the floor is that bad outside of actual NFC Championship Kevin King getting obliterated all year long, which in reality wasn't the case. King was bad, but that NFC Championship was an extra layer of bad, I suppose. And it was a top 10 secondary last season. But I think they can be much better than that, especially if Stokes hits as a first-round pick. He's got the upside to do it. I wish it was Asante Samuel Jr. So there is the defense. I hope I kind of convinced you on some of the upside here. I think you look at the talent, it's clearly there. They have high-end talent, both in their pass rush and in their secondary, and high-end talent doesn't even do that justice. And I love the 3-4 kind of bend don't break quarters coverage defense here, getting put in place. And as long as Joe Barry can communicate the scheme and get these guys in the right place, and you bench Kevin King for Eric Stokes, this could be a really explosive special defense, which if paired with the second best offense in the NFL, it doesn't take really any imagination at all to see how and why this team can rank second and why this team can win a Super Bowl this year. So we'll get into the schedule here in just a second, but do let me know in the comments below, have I convinced you to this point? I'm curious, because there was a lot of pushback on Packers over Chiefs. I'm just curious if you're buying into this defense a little bit more now that you've taken a deeper look at it. But let's get into the schedule. So Vegas has them at 10 wins. Currently, the over is at -160, which is really bad payout. That tells you that people are hammering that, so they had to keep making the payout worse. So it's going to go up to 10.5 wins probably before the season starts. But you look at the schedule and you can kind of see why it's a little bit lower. I mean, they have a lot of tough games. They have to play the AFC North and the NFC West, which, man, you can make a pretty strong case. Those are the two best divisions in football. I think if you just did the average of power ranking or the median of power rankings, I think in both cases, those would be the two best divisions in football. So a bad draw there. A really nice draw, though, that they get technically at New Orleans week 1. That's almost a free win for them. They'll still have to show up and play well, but you get Jameis's first start for them, but most importantly, that game is going to be probably played at AT&T Stadium because of the hurricane where Rodgers owns. You got David Onyemata suspended, Michael Thomas not going to be playing in that game. So a huge break to at least get one of their road games that was supposed to be tough. Should be kind of a gift for them. But they do have some tough games in there. I have them losing those 4 tough road games at San Francisco, at Kansas City, at Minnesota, and at Baltimore, but getting some hard-fought home wins as well at Cleveland, the Rams, Seattle, and Pittsburgh, and Washington. So I have them going 13-4, but a lot of those are good playoff caliber teams. And it's not going to come easy for them, but they've been a 13-win team over the last 2 seasons. I do think this is a better version of this Green Bay Packers team. They're just very incrementally getting better year by year. Hopefully it's enough this year. We'll see. Again, let me know in the comments down below what you think. Did you enjoy the deep dive? Have I changed your opinion? Are you a little bit more convinced on the Packers at 2, or am I still crazy? Just let me know. Either way, if you enjoyed, please do hit that like button. It really does help me out. And we have the last deep dive of our number 1 team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. No longer a surprise. Coming up here on Sunday. And I appreciate you guys for watching. Until then, peace.